Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Londonderry Town Council meeting for January 4th, 2021. So far, we've made it to the next year, and hopefully it's going to be a successful one. If you could all please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Ladies and gentlemen, seeing that it's the beginning of the year, let's all have a moment of silence for all those that came before us, all those that have worked so hard through this pandemic, those who we've lost, the military who protects us, the first responders who have been working around the clock, and let's hope they can get this vaccine out quickly. Thank you. So, ladies and gentlemen, we start with public comment. We've been in communication with New Hampshire DES for some time with regards to the drinking water concerns here in Londonderry. They are, I guess Brandon Kernan is on the phone. He's going to update us this evening. Kevin?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That is correct. I've been having numerous conversations with the Department of Environmental Services over the last few months with regard to a number of the testing that has been going on in town in the way of PFOAs in groundwater as well as arsenic. And it seems the more tests that are done, the more results that we're seeing where levels are higher than what is allowed or deemed safe by the state Department of Environmental Services. And so I've asked a representative from DES to speak with the council tonight to brief the council on what they're seeing in Londonderry and what some potential mitigation solutions, what the game plan is from the state's perspective going forward. And with that, I would turn it over to Brandon.
Just let me state that Councilor Paul is attending remotely this evening. Thank you. Brandon,
Thank you.
the floor is yours.
Thank you, Kevin. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, great. Thank you. I'm Brandon Kernan. I'm the administrator of the Drinking Water and Groundwater Bureau in the Water Division for DES. I stepped in tonight for Mike Wimsatt, who's the director of the Waste Division, who had an emergency come up and couldn't make this meeting. But we definitely wanted to keep you updated on the progress in addressing some groundwater quality issues in Londonderry. There's a lot of work going on in Londonderry, especially relative to PFAS in residential and public water supply wells. For residential wells, at this time, there's a lot of sampling that's occurred, some that the town helped with its town-wide sampling, other sampling that St. Gobain is completing, and other sampling that the Department of Environmental Services is completing. And within Londonderry, there's sort of two areas. One's designated a St. Gobain consent decree area, and it goes in other towns other than Londonderry as well, but it's an area where the state and St. Gobain have an agreement where if there's PFAS contamination above a standard in public or private wells, that St. Gobain will address that and mitigate the impacts. And so that's within the consent decree area. Outside that area, there's also private wells, so we have sampling occurring in both areas. Outside the area, a responsible party other than St. Gobain could be responsible for mitigating impacts, but where the impacts are not known where they're coming from, what responsible party, or possibly partially associated with St. Gobain, the state can't compel St. Gobain to necessarily address those PFAS impacts outside the consent decree area. And for residential wells at this time, there's about 200 residential wells outside the consent decree area in Londonderry that exceed a PFAS MCL, and that's our safe drinking water standard. And then there's roughly about 100 residential wells inside the consent decree area that exceed the standard that, if attributed to St. Gobain, will be addressed by them. And that's a rough number because there's a little bit of lag from the consultant loading data into our database. One process the state has that's really contributing to all the activities occurring in Londonderry is that there's a state law that requires when there's a sample and we detect a man-made contaminant over our state standard, that we send notifications to other potential well owners, public or private, within 500 feet of that exceedance or within the wellhead protection area of a public water system. And because we've had so many exceedances in Londonderry, the more sampling we do, the bigger our backlog gets, because we have that 500-foot circle drawn and we send the notifications out to homeowners. And so we're continuing to sample, but the backlog's piling up a bit because of the number of exceedances as we keep finding more and more and drawing those 500-foot circles. What we recently did that has triggered a lot of response in Londonderry in the last week is just last week, I believe on the 28th, 600 notifications were sent to potential well owners in Londonderry, letting them know about a nearby exceedance of a PFAS standard. And with that letter, we not only let them know about the exceedance within 500 feet of their possible well, but we also provide them a link to an online map so that people receive letters can look at results for their area. And we also gave them a link to a site where they can sign in and provide their contact information and a request to have their well sampled. That doesn't mean they're going to be sampled immediately because of the backlog that's occurring, but it's the process for getting them in a sampling queue is going on that website provided in the letter. And then we also provided everyone that received that letter information about how they could sample their own well if they don't want to wait for the state to complete the sampling. So, the considerations of sampling for the well and the labs in the region that provide the testing services. Based on that letter that went out last week, we probably received about 50 calls already at DES seeking their well to be sampled, and we're redirecting those calls to the website to fill out the information request to be sampled. It's just more efficient for capturing the information we need to make appointments and identifying location and prioritizing in our database and geographic information system. So we encourage people that want their well sampled to go to that website opposed to calling. So that's where we're redirecting them. At this time, sampling is still occurring in Londonderry. We're doing about 50 wells a week. We hope to increase that to about 100 wells. Things are a little more complicated with the pandemic, obviously. Staff has to ensure they're minimizing where they're traveling and get back to the office without making extra stops and things like that. We hope to get up to 100 wells a week over the next month or so. I will say the state's doing a lot more sampling than just 100 wells a week. We probably do about 200, but there's other areas of the state that have issues as well. So that's the summary
Brandon,
for the residential wells.
All right, Brandon, can you hold it for a minute just for...
Yes.
So this is John Farrell from the Town Council. So I have some clarification questions. What is the current PFOA limit in the state of New Hampshire?
So we have standards for 4 PFAS compounds. The main one for Londonderry is PFOA, and the standard's 12 parts per trillion. But we have standards for 3 others, PFNA at 11 parts per trillion, PFOS at 15 parts per trillion, and PFHXS at 18 parts per trillion. And some wells do have those other analytes above the standard, but by and far, PFOA is the driver in Londonderry.
So what is the federal standard for these items?
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you completely.
What is the federal government standard for these items?
The federal government established a health advisory of 70 parts per trillion for PFOA and PFOS combined. So we have separate standards for PFOS. Ours is 15, and PFOA is 12. The federal government made that advisory in 2016. I will say they haven't done much work on revising that number since that time, and other agencies have come up with other lower numbers. Based on the most recent toxicity information and health risk assessments, states like New Hampshire, Vermont, Massachusetts, New York, Michigan have all developed their own MCLs with the lack of federal leadership on this issue, and we're all in the same ballpark. We have slightly different numbers, but we're all between 10 and 20 parts per trillion, adding up different analytes by state. But the states that have used the most recent work have come up with pretty similar numbers with separate initiatives.
So what is the status of the current court case that was stayed by the judge back in March or April?
Well, when we adopted our standards that I just rattled off for those 4 compounds, 3M and a few other parties filed a suit against the state, and the court put a temporary injunction in place. That injunction's now been removed, and so our standards fully in effect. So the challenge against
When was the injunction removed?
I'm sorry?
When was the injunction removed?
It was, I don't have the exact date, but I believe it was September of this year.
So September, the order was lifted.
Yes, the injunction from us enforcing that MCL was lifted by the court, roughly September.
So does the
I can give you the exact
state,
date.
well, when the injunction went in place, the state had no official standard, correct?
Right, we could not enforce that legally. We could only enforce the older standard that we had, which was consistent with EPA's 2016 health advisory of 70 parts per trillion. So our message was, we believe the safe limit is our MCL, but it's being litigated, and we can't enforce it, but now we can.
So you're saying now that these standards are in place and we can legally enforce it, and that has the 3 companies appealed this decision? I mean, you said the
No.
injunction was lifted.
No, they
Is
dropped,
there
yeah.
a legal state limit today that's enforceable?
The companies that challenged the state standard have dropped their lawsuit. And one of the reasons is one of their bases for appeal sort of got trumped by the legislature. Those companies, one of the points they made is that we didn't make our standards correctly by not assessing the costs as they interpreted the law to require. And what the legislature did past summer is they just put the MCLs into law without any process. And so that kind of made the court challenge not valid anymore because the law was now different. The numbers were in law as opposed to rulemaking.
Is this the legislation that doesn't go into effect till 2023?
Oh no, this legislation takes effect now. It was effective July this year, but we are waiting for clarity from the court, with the new law relative to the pending litigation. So we didn't enforce it right away until we got clarity from the courts.
So I have a state rep sitting here who's not aware of this legislation. Perhaps you can send it along to the town manager. I mean, I have a state rep here on the town council who was not aware of this legislation.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you.
I have a state rep who's sitting here on the town council who is not aware of this legislation. Could you please send the legislation along to the town manager?
Yes, I will send the bill.
Thank you. Please proceed.
Okay, so that's the summary of residential wells. I can move on to public water supplies unless we want to discuss residential wells. And I'll talk about some future potential actions in a minute after I talk about the public water supply systems. So for public water systems in Londonderry, and these are small systems that are serving more than 25 people on a regular basis, and they could be like a small condominium development, or they could be an office park where the same people drink the same water every day, presumably. There's about 22 that need to sample, comply with the PFAS standard. And so far we have results for 16 of them. We will get the results for the other 6. Either they're pending or they're late, and we'll chase them down. Of the 16 results that we have, 7 exceed an MCL that the state has adopted. Those include Century Village condos, Old Country Village, Harvest Village, and then Rolling Meadows condos 1, 3, and 4. The largest population served is by far at Century Village condos, which is 800 to 900 people being served at that water system, and the other systems are relatively small. 9 are below the MCL, but 5 of the 9 that are below the MCL for PFOA have a concentration of PFOA at 50% or more of the MCL. So while they're below, they're not necessarily, very low. And so, monitoring over the long term, we'll have to definitely watch trends. So, the department's aware that there's a pretty, well, hold on, let me back up 1 second. I'll just also point out that the state has adopted new standards for arsenic and manganese, and that's going to affect water systems throughout the state, but also in Londonderry. So as we're looking at solutions to address PFAS, we definitely want to also look at the water systems relative to their other water quality results. And the arsenic and manganese have nothing to do with the PFAS contamination. They're naturally occurring, but you need to take care of everything at one time. Doesn't make sense to address the contaminants piecemeal. So, our next steps is to continue to characterize the extent of contamination and the exposure to what we consider unsafe levels of PFAS, and then do the same for the other contaminants. And then we're already internally at the department, and I know Mike Wimsat has had some introductory conversations with Kevin on this, starting to assess remedies, be it looking at responsible parties, actions the state can take, the town can take, maybe short-term measures and long-term measures to address water quality concerns. Things like installing treatment or connections to water systems. Then, of course, one of the most important things, the thing that will get this done, is funding. Looking at grants, be it from the Emerging Contaminant Fund, the Drinking Water Trust Fund, and then even loans, which would also be the trust fund or maybe the state revolving loan fund. One thing we're having pretty frequent meetings about internally, just sort of brainstorming about options for Londonderry and then other parts of the state too, especially in the southern part of the state, is looking at where these really small water systems with a PFAS problem or another water quality problem are in very close proximity to a larger water system that has very good water quality and a very adequate quantity, and looking for interconnection opportunities. Not that we can compel anyone to do it, but at least if we can look at it and quantify the opportunities in addition to other solutions such as treatment, as we look at different funding sources, we'll have that information available. But what we really need to do is, at the agency, is start really nailing these concepts down and circle back with the town over the next few months to talk about the path forward, both in the short term and long term, to eliminate exposure to the PFAS in drinking water. And it's undoubtedly going to be costly. We have 600 more wells that have been notified, homeowners with wells that have been notified, and as we sample that, population is going to continue to grow. So it's going to be complicated and undoubtedly costly, but our senior leadership, right up to our commissioner, is aware of this, and we'll be checking back in with the town, as Mike Wimsat has told Kevin, about options for addressing these problems. I will say there's some short-term measures that may not be very satisfying to residents, but there are short-term measures they can take to reduce exposure to PFAS. Obviously, bottled water is an option, and the state has sampled bottled water, and results are online. In a nutshell, the purified treated bottled water was always non-detect for PFAS, and then many spring water brands were as well. Some weren't. Another thing that residents can do is look at installing a point of use treatment. That's like a treatment dedicated at a faucet, like at your kitchen sink. And that could be a very cost-effective way to treat your water. If you do it yourself, it's a couple $100s to buy a reverse osmosis system that not only removes PFAS, but removes almost all the other contaminants I mentioned before. Or if for about $1,000, you could pay a professional to install that kind of system. That's the kind of system that even I install in my well, even though I meet standards, just because I know it provides a layer of safety and it treats the water very effectively. And we have some information about those type of treatment systems. And that, again, that's if residents want to act before the state and town have a resolution. And then there's also options for homeowners installing treatment systems on their own for the whole home, a point of entry system. That's generally just for PFAS using a carbon material. You can't do reverse osmosis, so you wouldn't be taking care of the other things that could very likely be in your water, like arsenic and uranium. And to the extent the town wants us to reach out to residents, we can do a presentation or an online meeting or what have you to talk about those kind of things. We'd be happy to, or provide materials that you could link to your website. You could do that as well. So that's my quick update. Again, I apologize for Mike not being here tonight. Again, he just had a pretty significant emergency that redirected him.
I appreciate that. We're in a public comment session, so I'm going to see if anyone in the public has any questions for you, if that's okay.
Okay.
Councilor Paul.
Hello? Hello?
Yeah, okay.
ahead, Counselor, you can go ahead and ask your question.
Okay. My first question is, I hear all this stuff, and I'd like to know a timeline on when you expect to see these things actually be putting in place. I don't hear you saying it's going to take 4 weeks, a month, 10 years. I know there's legal stuff involved, but you're talking about inconveniencing people who are, stuck without drinking water. And it is an inconvenience to them. So I guess I would like to hear you say something for people to do right now, and I would like to know somewhat of a timeline of when these things are actually going to be starting to be triggered, and to see things happening for these people to get some relief from their wells. So that's my biggest question. The other thing is, I've also heard mixed information about the I forgot what reverse osmosis. If you have a septic, pushing all that water into your septic can damage your leach fields. So people should be made aware of the damages that can be done to their property, along with fixing their water. So if you could answer some of those questions, that would be great. Thanks.
Okay, I'm going to need help restating the second question. I only maybe heard the word leach field in it, and water quality. But for the first question, timeline, that's a very fair question, and I can't lay out a full timeline right now. I will say in the immediate future, because we're already working on it right now, we're beginning to develop concepts that we're going to share with the town over the next couple months. I think some of them are more simpler potentially, such as grant programs or financial assistance. I don't know if it'd be partial or full for possibly short-term treatment, point-of-use treatment. That's a little simpler. Things about potentially extending water lines to public water system or residential wells is much more complicated. It requires a lot of coordination with the larger water systems, smaller water systems, and a lot more financing. And so what I can commit is that we're going to have a very active engagement with the town to come up with this timeline over the next couple months, but I can't lay out for the department what that timeline is at the moment. And it'd be fair to ask us for routine updates like this until we get to that more holistic picture.
So you can't give me a long-term timeline, but can you maybe give a short-term timeline or an anticipation? I mean, there should be some idea of how long things are going to where things are going to progress and how they're going to progress and at what rate they're going to progress.
Yeah, I think we actually need a couple months to come out with that comprehensive timeline. I think we can potentially come up with short-term mitigation measures in a much shorter time frame, within a matter of months, potentially working with the different funding options. It's that bigger picture where there's a lot more engineering and assessments and agreements with a lot of different stakeholders. So I'm sorry, I can't lay that out at the moment. And all the while, we're getting a lot more data in. I mean, we may not even have half the data yet based on this trends of these sampling results. So we continue to expand the area of concern.
All right, thank you.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the second part of the question very well. Something about damage to leach fields?
So the question, Brandon, was, is there anything that you can share with us about if you use install a reverse osmosis system, whether that would then push the water into the leach field and thereby damage your leach field?
Okay. So for reverse osmosis, you're only using that on a dedicated faucet like the kitchen sink, and it would only be for cooking or water that you're ingesting. And so for every clean groundwater you produce with reverse osmosis, it wastes another 3 to 5 gallons. So that sounds like a terrible ratio, but if you're only limiting it to drinking, which you are because it's at the kitchen sink and maybe the refrigerator faucet or ice maker, you're talking about an increase of 10, 15 gallons a day going to your leach field. And so that's really a de minimis amount. It does take the contaminants that was in the water and pushes them to the leach field, which sounds undesirable, but again, you still have all that other water going through your home that's untreated going to your leach field. And that's where the water was going anyway. And frankly, the aerial deposition of PFAS is so substantial in southern New Hampshire that that small amount of PFAS that's removed from your drinking water, which is the most important thing, going back to your leach field, is having an inconsequential effect on contamination distribution, especially if that's where the water's going right now without treatment.
So, I guess, Brandon, from the town council's perspective, we've, this has been ongoing for us for a couple of years, and it all sort of came to a head right before the pandemic. And to say that, we're underwhelmed by the response from the state and putting out standards that there's no timeline to, is disappointing, at the least. I mean, I spoke to Nathan who distributes the water at Monadnock just last week, and he said there's been 200 families added since Thanksgiving, and that they're getting overwhelmed with the delivery of water, to Londonderry alone, to where it would be a couple of days, it's now a couple of weeks for them to meet the demand. And it's really disappointing to hear that there's not a timeline. Perhaps we'll take the initiative and give you a timeline and tell you how quickly we would like to move. And then, since we've waited so long, we need to move a lot faster. And I understand you can't speak for the department or anything else, but we can speak for the residents of Londonderry that this has gone on way too long. So I'm going to move on to some further public comment, but that's the overall feeling that we've had for several months that we haven't been able to get an answer. But please be patient, and I'll move to the public after I ask for the rest of the council. Anyone else from the council?
Mr. Chair, I just have one question for Brandon. Brandon, currently, are there any residents being offered bottled water outside of those areas, either with St. Gobain or having to do with the Apple Tree Mall? Are there any other residents in town that are being offered bottled water if their wells are testing high right now, or is that not something DES is doing?
I will need to verify it, but it's my understanding the majority of wells impacted by PFAS outside the consent decree area and not associated with another known contamination site are not being provided bottled water at the moment. But I could verify that, but that's my understanding.
Thank you.
So I just want to reflect, I understand the town's feeling and the residents' feelings. Staff, there's a real sense of urgency here. This problem is enormous. It's something we never anticipated could even occur at this magnitude in our state. Plume going tens of square miles. And you're right, we need to ramp up and come up with a solution for Londonderry. And, leadership is committed to doing that and working with the town on doing that. And you're right, there were initiatives pre-pandemic, but things did get a little stalled. And that's unfortunate, but our focus is getting back on this, obviously.
Is there anyone further from the public who would like to comment this evening? Yes, sir. Please come up to the microphone. Yes, sir. Come right up here.
Hi.
And give us your name and address.
Ray Breslin, 3 Gary Drive. Is Brandon still on the line?
He is.
I'd just like a clarification on the way of measuring. We've heard of parts per trillion, but there's another way of so much per liter. What is the other way of measuring PFOA?
So the labs report the PFAS results in nanograms per liter, which is equivalent to parts per trillion. So they're used interchangeably in a liquid form. And then if you were doing it in soil, it'd be grams per kilogram or grams per gram or nanogram per gram. But we're doing it parts per trillion or nanograms per liter.
Okay, so they're kind of comparable, is that right?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
So 12 parts per trillion is equal to how many nanograms or liters or whatever the other thing is?
Yeah, 12 parts per trillion is 12 nanograms per liter.
Okay, all right. So my other question is that recently we've, from the New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services, who you're connected with, on your website is showing in Londonderry as high as 500. That's of real concern. And from groundwater, not from wells per se, but from groundwater and monitoring wells. Where are we at with that?
I'm sorry, was your question that you saw on our map that some sites had up to 500
Yes.
parts per trillion?
Yes.
So that's certainly a type of result you would see at a site where there's been a release. So where there's might have been firefighting foam, or an industrial site that discharged PFAS. Near a source release area, you would see things like 500, and quickly as you move away from that release point, you would go down to 100, 10, 0 parts per trillion. In the area of Londonderry, though, where the residential well sampling is occurring due to largely the air deposition sites, we're very much more seeing results in the sort of 12 to 30 part per trillion range, if not consistent with an area where it's been spilled directly to the ground.
Okay, but for instance, along Mammoth Road, we have some high spots there that are over 400. That's a residential area. That's not from a well per se, a drinking water well, but apparently it's been monitored there. And there are other areas, for instance, in back of Staples, where the now is being a test well. Who is performing that?
You know, I could look up those specific results, and they would have a site number and site study files with results, and I would have the name of the responsible party or potentially responsible party and consultants. And so, like, you can write down the point ID or what have you. I can get you links to the reports online. But again, those are likely contamination sites where something was released directly. And while those levels are high and very undesirable, they very much become low as you move hundreds of feet away. And so a 500 part per trillion result doesn't mean thousands of feet away you're going to see a similar result. You'll see either non-detect if you're up gradient, or if you're down gradient, it'll dilute to lower levels in the below 50, 20 parts per trillion as you move thousands of feet away from the site.
Well, that could be possible, but we have any number of monitoring wells here in the town of Londonderry. Is the New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services testing those, and what are the results?
So we're monitoring wells that are associated with active waste sites, and I can give you a list of active waste sites in Londonderry that have PFAS. That's actually reported online. Those are tracked by DES staff, and the work is completed by licensed engineers and consultants. And so all that information is online as to who's completing the work, and then DES's review of that work.
Yeah,
So again, as you have sites around town you're interested in, I could try, or we can't find the site for you, provide you detailed information.
Yeah, I believe the gentleman is talking about some of the EPA sites that we have in town. That
Well,
would be something
no,
else.
how about behind Shaw's?
Well,
there's
that-
two
that's-
monitoring
well,
wells there.
that's going to be addressed in a Warren article later.
Well,
That-
I'm
that-
asking, wait a minute.
That's a different issue.
No, that's an issue right now.
No, it's an issue we're going to address later in the meeting. We have a Warren article, and we're going to talk about it.
You're going to have a warrant article about water?
About Shaw's, yes. And we're going to talk about that later in the meeting. The homes behind Shaw's, we have a Warren article we're going to discuss
Well, that's fine.
later in the meeting.
That's fine. I'm asking a question about the monitoring wells now behind Shaw's. There's two of them. What are the results?
Right, and we'll be happy to discuss that.
I'm asking Brandon.
I understand that.
Well, let him answer.
Sir, you're out of order. We will
I
be
can
discussing
provide
this.
information about any specific result that you see
And-
on our
and-
online
and
map offline. I need it emailed to me. I can look it up. I can provide it. I don't have it in front of me right now.
We'll be
Okay.
discussing it later.
Okay. Is there anything else?
I don't have anything else.
Okay. Let me just say one other thing. This is not a new situation. This is not 1 year ago, 2 years ago, or 3 years ago. This has been going on for a long time. I've been talking to the town about it. Now all of a sudden, it's a big issue. It is a big issue and needs to be addressed, not for the taxpayers, for the young people, okay? This is what our concern needs to be, and our priorities need to be to take care of this. And to say that the state's responsibility, it's not the state's responsibility, it is the town's responsibility to take care of its people. Okay? Thank you.
Anything further on public comment on this subject only? Yes, sir. Name and address, please, for our record.
Good evening. I'm Dave LaRochelle at 22 Shasta Drive in Londonderry. I have a couple of points and an observation with a gentleman from DES. I did receive a letter a week ago that well within 500 feet of my residence tested positive, so I'm very concerned. He mentioned reverse osmosis. Now, that's taking water, taking the PFOAs and other contaminants out and putting them in another spot, be it your leach field or a sewer. It's basically moving it from one spot to another, from pocket A to pocket B. The water you receive from reverse osmosis is also considered dead water. If you want drinking water with quality, you're going to have to put a system in to put minerals back into the water. So reverse osmosis, to me, is not a great solution for personal residents. All right, I don't know about any of the other situations or filtering systems, but I think that's a problem. And again, it's moving it from one spot to another. So that water from the leach field is going to be going down through the ground. It's going to be carried wherever he goes, and it's going to show up somewhere else. So this is a very important issue. The other thing that came to mind is, I remember a few years back, and it may be 10 or 20 years ago, as a gentleman mentioned, he talked about young people. Well, I'm certainly not young, but I don't want to go. I'm a cancer survivor, and I want to stay a cancer survivor. And I know some people in this room have had cancer. In fact, my brother-in-law died 8 hours ago from cancer. So it's a pretty important item to protect us. And our water system is the most important item on the face of the earth. Without water, we can't survive. So the other point that I want to make is, in that study, be it 10 or 20 years ago, we were talking about the airport and the fact that planes are de-ice. I thought we were doing some monitoring up there, but I don't know what's happened with it. Can anybody comment about what we're doing at the airport?
So Brandon, the question is that the de-icing material that was being used at the Manchester airport, was DES involved in the monitoring of that de-icing material?
I know historically there has been a lot of DS involvement with the de-icing material and where it runs off to and surface and groundwater quality. I don't recall PFAS being part of that. I think it's more like urea type compounds, but I would have to pull the file and get that and provide that information to you. I just don't have my fingertips.
Okay, is there any known site, like, I mean, I'm further away from Saint-Gobain. Like, where does our PFOAs come, where are they coming from? Is there any indication from the state where that's coming from?
So, sir, I can answer part of that based on you're on Shasta. Currently, there's a consent decree that's in place that had been agreed to by Saint-Gobain, and the line is drawn at High Range Road. In the presentation that has been given to us in the past, it's a legal line, not a scientific line. So, and that's from the Saint-Gobain PFOAs. Brandon can correct me if I'm saying something that's not correct. It also leads into another question that I had for him that I'll just piggyback on it is has the consent decree been changed for all areas, or does it remain as I just described? Brandon?
I would really prefer Mike Wimstat and Jeff March, who I think came down and presented to talk about it, but it's my understanding that consent decree remains the way it is for PFOA, which is the primary contaminant associated with Saint-Gobain's air release.
So it remains as I described it to you. Hopefully that answers your question. Perhaps, do you have something else, Counselor?
No, I want to talk about reverse osmosis.
I'll let this gentleman finish here, and then we can do that. Sir, the floor is yours. Do you have anything else, sir?
No, that was basically it. I was just trying to find out where, you know, where is the problem coming from?
It's been
If it's
identified
not
that it's coming from
Saint-Gobain.
Saint-Gobain, yes.
So is there any recourse? I mean, obviously, we don't all individually want to sue Saint-Gobain.
So current, I mean, it's a long story, but the short story is that Merrimack has been suing Saint-Gobain, has been taking action against Saint-Gobain. We have been supporting everything that Merrimack is doing, and and will join in anything that we can to, hold that party responsible. And hopefully, this is all tonight. We're getting we're getting updated information based on what we hadn't heard since last March. And that what you'll probably hear at the end of this conversation is that we'll be moving to take some sort of proactive action. And what that is, we'll discuss with our legal counsel and try to move forward with a more aggressive timeline, getting more information from the state, and seeing, I guess the thing we keep saying is who can we hold responsible for the citizens of Londonderry, which we've been aggressively trying to get an answer to. I don't know if that answers your questions.
Well, it's a start, but I think it's something we need to pursue aggressively.
Yeah, I mean, feel free to call me offline. I'm happy to talk to you about it as long as you like. I live within the Descent Decree area on the other side of High Range Road, so I'm fairly well versed in it and happy to talk to you at length.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yes, Tom.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. LaRochelle, I just wanted to go back to something you had mentioned about reverse osmosis. Typically, a household system of reverse osmosis does not backflush into the septic system, which is what you're thinking is those contaminants now go into the septic system, which go back down to the water table. They're typically contained in the filter itself, and those reverse osmosis filters at the household level are not backflushed and sent back into the septic system. So just so for those members of the public who may be listening and may be considering a reverse osmosis system, I just wanted to be accurate. Now, I can't speak to a more commercial size reverse osmosis system, but the household ones I know don't do a backflush.
Yes, Kevin.
If I may, it's the carbon filters that don't backflush. The only way reverse osmosis functions is by having water pressed against the membrane and reject water discharged to wastewater. And so reverse osmosis doesn't contain contaminants itself. It rejects contaminants, and it does go to the leach field. And again, each person uses about 80 gallons of water a day. All that water is not being treated if you're using just point of use. So it's contaminated water is going through your house, through your showers, through your toilets, through your washing machine, back to the septic system. Reverse osmosis is cleaning water you're drinking, but leaving the contaminants with the groundwater where it came from. The groundwater around those septic systems is probably contaminated if your well is contaminated. And because you're talking about 15 gallons a day, where you have thousands of gallons a day flowing through your yard, just by the natural flow of groundwater, discharging PFAS back to septic field doesn't change what you're doing now. That's where it's going now, and it doesn't change the chemical balance or extended contamination. But I understand the perspective. It's great to get it out if you can, but it has no meaningful effect on overall contamination for that very small amount of water.
Kevin.
Thank you. Brandon, Kevin Smith, just a couple of follow-up comments and questions. With regard to Saint-Gobain, I don't know what remaining legal leverage the department has over them, but when the PFAS was discovered, the standard at the time that DES was using was still 70 parts per trillion. And as a result of that, it appeared the most effective or affected communities were Litchfield, Merrimack, and Bedford. And in fact, there were very few wells at the time that were over the 70 part per trillion in Londonderry. And in a way, I kind of feel like because of that standard at the time, Londonderry got left out of the response for the mitigation response that was entered into with Saint-Gobain. For instance, in Litchfield, a good portion of Litchfield was put on municipal water that was paid for by Saint-Gobain because there were so many homes that were over the 70 part per trillion at the time. And I can only wonder if the standard were 12 parts per trillion, what would Londonderry have received at that time when those settlement agreements were entered into? So, because I know right now people are getting bottled water, but I don't think there's any long-term plan for either a water filtration system or reverse osmosis or municipal water to be provided in Londonderry, even though it was just as affected now, we know, as those other communities were. So I just want to put that out there on the record so DES is aware of it as you continue to talk to or go to court with Saint-Gobain in the future.
So hold on, just to piggyback on that question is that are there any ongoing lawsuits regarding the state's PFOA standard at this time?
There's no entity suing us against challenging our standards. The state is suing the makers of PFAS chemicals. At the corporate level, there's multiple lawsuits that the Department of Justice is pursuing for the damages that have occurred to drinking water and natural resources throughout the whole state. But those are likely to go on that litigation for several years. But at this time, our standards are not being challenged.
So Saint-Gobain, 3M have not filed new lawsuits against the state?
That's correct. And Saint-Gobain did not file a lawsuit against their standard. It was 3M, RMI, and Plymouth Village District, and then a farmer, Charlie Hansen.
So there are no ongoing ones. Okay, thank you.
In Brandon, is the consent decree with Saint-Gobain, is that the only consent decree that would affect Londonderry? Are there any other consent decrees that would affect Londonderry on this issue of PFOAs?
I would have to clarify. That's the only one I'm aware of, but I'd have to clarify with Mike Wimsat. Make sure there is something else I'm not aware of.
Okay, so we've been on this for a while. Is there anyone else here before I move on who would like to address the council or ask a question? Sir.
Ray Burslin, 3 Gary Drive. I guess I want to ask the question, is there anyone other than Saint-Gobain's that is responsible for PFOA, PFOS in Londonderry?
So that's a very site-specific question, but yes, as you go out through the town of Londonderry, there are other known sources of PFAS contamination that usually have a more localized effect, not the regional effect that the air deposition did. And so you'll see a different signature, different PFAS analytes, different concentration gradient. But again, they're not having broad regional effects, generally speaking. It's limited to a localized area opposed to square miles, which the air deposition releases caused.
Yeah. See, the concern here is that we're talking about PFOAs in the groundwater, whether it happened to come from Saint-Gobain's or another source. Like, for instance, if we read the report from the EPA, the 5-year report, it says in there quite clearly that there was PFOAs from the Tinkham Superfund site. And there is also PFOAs on Mammoth Road. Do you know, it would seem a little unusual that those would be from Saint-Gobain's because they're quite a lot further east than, for instance, High Range Road. Do you have any idea what that contaminant, PFOA, on Mammoth Road is from?
So for Mammoth Road, I'm not sure of the area of Mammoth Road you're talking about. And again, I'm I'm not prepared to talk about all the waste sites in Londonderry, although we could get prepared. But for instance, I know there's a tanker rollover somewhere on Mammoth Road at some point, and that was thought to be a site where firefighting foam saved human life. You know, a safety measure had to be used likely to contain a threat there. And as you go from site to site in Londonderry, and you know of a release site due to an industrial activity or firefighting, things like that, the groundwater data is generally usually easy to assess and interpret, like, hey, this is something else going on. This is a point release. Something happened right here, not from the air, but right here on the ground because the levels are higher, the soup of chemicals is different, and then the concentration changes regionally in this one area, and then you do your investigation of historic site activities. So you can usually segregate if it's air deposition, if it's a local release, or a combination of the two. And hydrogeology and contamination site assessment generally can tease that out pretty well. And again, we have a list of waste sites in Londonderry that have sampled for PFOA and their results. But again, where there's local land releases, those are very localized effects opposed to the air deposition, which is going miles out in southern New Hampshire.
Do you have anything else? Hello?
That's it. That's all. I think he's done.
He's gone?
No, he's here. He's finished answering the question.
Oh, okay. Okay, well, the bottom line is we need to know where the contaminants are coming from. We need to know who's responsible, and we need to address the action. The action is we're not going to dig it up, but if you have a well, you can pump the contaminants out, okay? That might be the first step. And that would be, we need to have the New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services working with the town to get this done, and we don't have to wait months. We need to take action now. Thank you.
All right, seeing no one else from the public. Brandon, we appreciate you coming on the line today. We have had Clark Freeze here, who I know has retired. Jeff Martz has been here. To say that, the town of Londonderry, the leadership of Londonderry, and the citizens are underwhelmed by the response from DES in this situation would probably be, the nicest thing I could say. We really need to be more proactive. I know this is not directed at you, but at the department, and that we're going to caucus and take a much more aggressive approach here, because this just should have moved a lot faster, and it's very disappointing that we're sending out letters telling people that their wells are affected because someone else is within 500 feet, yet we've laid dormant for several months. So, but thank you for your time this evening. We'll be back in touch, and we appreciate you stepping in for Michael.
Okay, I appreciate your comments, and I'll definitely convey them back to management.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, folks, we're still in public comment. Mr. DeFrancisco wanted to address the council, so why don't we do that next?
Is it okay from here if I undress?
Sure.
Thank you. Tony DeFrancesco, 1 Cheshire Court. Had some thoughts concerning all the hard work you all have been doing over the past 7 months. This is the first time I've participated here in a while. I know you've missed me, but I can tell you from home I participate every meeting, much to the chagrin of my wife. Luckily, she can go upstairs and watch something else. But so you all have been working really hard to try and work with the other side of government, school board, school district, school whatever. And you see, at every turn, it seems like you come against the wall of an RSA, a law, a rule, or whatever. Mr. Dolan will remember a meeting that I had with you and the town manager probably 5 years ago now when you were the chair. Mr. Farrell, you'll remember a meeting that you and I had with Mr. Smith probably 3 years ago now concerning a charter commission. I will tell you, there are other forms of government that will allow the two sides of government that we currently have to work together. The only way to do that is to open a charter commission, to investigate what else is out there, report back to you, and then you all can make a decision if you feel like doing that or not. That's the most obvious way so that you can work together, because it seems like the school district wants to do it, and it seems like you all want to do it, and yet there's things that keep getting in the way that you can't do it. You can't commingle money. You can't do this because of this RSA. You can't do that because of that RSA. This is one way to do it, and I would encourage you to put this on as an agenda item for a future meeting so we can get it on the March ballot. It's too late to do it any other way than to have you folks put it on. It is a 3 to 5 year process to start and finish. It could be that the Charter Commission will find out, you know what, nothing we can do. But at this point, we don't know that. And I think you all owe it to the taxpayers to have the question answered. So thank you for that. If you have any questions, I'd be glad to answer, or I can do it at the end. The other thing is I have good news, because for the last 7 months, I've heard gloom and doom about everything that's gone on. The sky is falling, Chicken Little, life is bad, everybody is losing their houses, and things are horrible. Well, I'm here to tell you that that's not 100% true, and in fact, I ran a report. I will tell you I am a licensed New Hampshire realtor, and I did have the opportunity to run a report. And by the way, before I did that, I called Town Hall to find out that as of 10 days ago, actually 12 days ago now, 95% of the incoming taxes that needed to be paid were paid. That's great news. People didn't think that was going to happen. But I can tell you that in 2020 in the town of Londonderry, there were 18% more single-family homes and condos sold, transferred, however you want to call it, than there was in 2019. We had 9 or 10 months of COVID, depending on how you want to count it. And yet, there were still more than 500 families that wanted to move into Londonderry. Now, the statistics are ballpark. They're thumbnails. Don't hold me to 500. It's not exactly 500. It's actually more than that. Because I will tell you, one of the trends that happened in Londonderry this year was there was a lot of off-market sales. I participated in several, many actually. The buyer and the seller knew each other from Facebook, got together, called, said, hey, can you work the paperwork for us? Those don't make the MLS. So there was more than that.
You're running out of time, sir, so.
Now, I want to tell you that you have an obligation to those people who moved into this town, knowing what the tax rate is, and knowing that, that there was a certain level of service. I think in your meetings for the past 7 months, in particular, that my people have not been represented. I have not been represented. And I will tell you right now that I'm happy with the level of service. I want my police and fire to be happy, and I want my roads plowed. I want no potholes. I want all the services that I'm currently getting. And there's a lot of people like me out there. I talk to them every day. So I'm hoping that you understand that people want to come to Londonderry because of certain levels of services that we have. And y'all need to make sure that that continues. So thank you for your time. I'll be glad to answer any questions that you have. How come Ray wasn't on a time limit? Just a question.
He didn't go over his.
Really? Interesting.
See, when someone's up talking and someone else is answering the questions, I give them a little bit more time.
Understood. appreciate the thought, and I appreciate the time. Thank you for your work.
You're welcome. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, anyone else for public comment? Seeing none, we're going to be moving forward. I'd like to move to the budget workshop quickly, but let me work through these. Resolutions should be fairly quick. Resolution 202101, resolution amending and extending Resolution 2020-03 relative to the expiration date of the Town of Londonderry temporary leave policy. First reading. I'll accept the motion to waive first reading.
Second.
All those in favor signify by saying aye. Chair votes affirmative. Roll call vote.
Aye, Joe Green. Aye, Jim Butler. Aye, Tom Dolan.
I, Deb Paul.
Aye, John Farrell. 5-0. Order 2021-01, an order relative to the expenditure of maintenance trust funds for various projects. I don't see Mr. Cotton.
He's unable to be here this evening.
So we're looking mainly here at the
Winter maintenance.
the winter maintenance piece. So I'm looking at $8,970. It looks like I have winter maintenance for town hall, library, fire, police, Morrison Access Center, $7,925. And then I have winter maintenance for the senior center of $1,045. And it looks like I'm dealing with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 events. Can I have a motion to approve?
Second.
All those in favor signify by saying, roll call vote.
Aye, Jim Butler. Aye, Tom Dolan.
I, Deb Paul.
John Farrell, 5-0. Okay, moving to the budget workshop. All right, I have asked the town manager to prepare several things for this evening for presentation with regards to the town budget. We have looked at, as Mr. DeFrancisco, who has left the room now, had pointed out, we have looked at revenues over the last several months. We've looked at comparison of tax rates from town to town. We've looked at level of services. We've looked at what the residents of Londonderry get for their level of service for the tax rate. And there has been, during the Christmas week, probably much to the chagrin of the finance department, I asked them to put together a lot of information to be shared with the public, sort of where do we stand in the grand scheme of everything. So I'm going to ask y'all to go through that and give us, do you understand what I'm saying? And to walk through those pieces that we discussed last week for preparation for this meeting.
So, Mr. Chair, I think the one of the items, and it's up on the screen right now, that we've pulled together is a comparison of a number of areas within the tax rate and our tax commitment, comparing us to communities that are of like size and also are in our vicinity. And so we looked at the communities we looked at are Wyndham, Bedford, Merrimack, Hooksett, Hudson, Seabrook, Portsmouth, Derry, Salem, Laconia, Dover, Manchester, and Keene. And what I would point out here is looking at the municipal rate. So again, there's 4 items that make up the entire tax rate for the town. There's a school rate, the local school rate, the state education tax, the county tax, and then the town tax. Londonderry's current town tax rate is $4.66. And when you look at us compared to all of the aforementioned communities, which are also up on that screen up there, you'll see that the municipal tax rate in Londonderry is lower than all but 2 of those communities, the 2 being Bedford and Wyndham, which is obviously considerably smaller in size. And again, if you go right across that, you'll see how much below or above. On the high end, you have the city of Keene, which has a lower population than Londonderry, but it's $10.15 higher than Londonderry's municipal rate. And then you have, Merrimack, which is 40 cents higher, Bedford, which is 42 cents lower, and I do know that Bedford just came off of a reval year as well.
With regards to the revalues, I believe that when we went through these, there was about 75% of them who've just come off a reval year.
Yes, that sounds about right. Yep. And I'd note, too, that geographically speaking, Londonderry, in terms of total area, is also the largest of all of these communities. But I think the number that is perhaps most striking there is when you look at the total tax commitment, because what that number is it represents your total school and town budget, basically, how much you're raising in both your town and school. And the interesting part to me is, so out of the 225 incorporated municipalities in the state of New Hampshire, Londonderry has the 77th lowest tax rate out of 225. However, we have the 7th highest tax commitment. In other words, the 7th highest, two budgets combined, town and school, but we have the 77th lowest tax rate. In other words, what that means is you're getting a considerable bang for your buck, in that we provide a tremendous amount of services in the way of police, fire, DPW, school services, for a very, very low cost. And if you look at the rank there of tax commitment, again, Londonderry is 7th, Keene is 11th, Manchester is 2nd, although Manchester's tax rate is $6.82 more than Londonderry's. Dover, 5th highest commitment, $4.53 higher than Londonderry's. But then look at a town like Derry. So Derry has the 8th, so we have a higher tax commitment than Derry, but Derry has a tax rate higher than Londonderry. So they're spending more and have spending less and have a higher tax rate. Same goes for Seabrook, same thing goes for Hudson, same thing goes for Hooksett, Merrimack. Bedford and Wyndham aren't spending as much on services, have a lower tax rate. But I thought this was and this was something that, Mr. Chair, you had asked us to pull together, and I think is a very valuable piece of a data point as we're looking specifically at the municipal budget and the municipal tax rate in town.
Yeah, a lot of this really came about from questions that I was being asked by the Budget Committee, and I started digging into some of the information on my own to come up with the question. So the impetuses really came from the Budget Committee, of them getting me to think about this. So I thank them for that. The other piece to this is that what I also asked you to put together is our revenues for the year so far and what those look like. So before we go to that, let me ask, does anybody any questions about, council, any questions about this piece? So let's talk a little bit about where we are on revenues, as we want to continue to track those closely as we continue to move forward.
Yeah, the revenues are holding steady so far for this fiscal year. The biggest, outside of property taxes, the biggest revenue driver is our motor vehicle registrations. It's actually trending higher than it was this time last year. And believe it or not, much to our surprise, the rental car registrations are also trending higher. I don't quite know what the reason is for that, but I'm certainly not complaining about it. But we would have expected a drop-off in the rental car revenue, given that the airport traffic is significantly down. But again, that is our number one revenue outside of property taxes, and it's doing pretty well thus far, 6 months into the current fiscal year. Justin, I don't know if you had anything else you want to add on the revenue side. So right now, revenue numbers are holding fairly well.
Any questions from the council on revenues? Justin, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Nope, I just wanted to comment that we received our Meals and Rooms contribution from the state at the end of December, and that's something that we would normally have received around the end of November. So going to the cash flow concern that I had previously, that would have played into it, but at this point, cash flow, we are perfectly fine.
And as Tony DeFrancesco pointed out, we are at a 95% collection rate of property taxes. And again, historically speaking, we've actually collected more at this point this fiscal year than we have in the last at least 3 fiscal years.
Okay. Any questions from the council? So, feedback I've received from the community thus far is that no one's really looking for a cut in services. Are any of you getting anything with regards to a cut in services? Because I'm not getting any comments back on them. All right, so then let's move to the budget process here. Now, taking into consideration that we do know we have a loss in revenue coming, and I'm going to work through these, and if I miss any, someone please stop me. I'm going to work through the warrant articles, starting with Article 2. So, looking at a budget here of $38,864,136,000. What I'm going to be looking for, and that adds at the $200,000 that we had asked for, below default. What I'm going to be looking for from the council in at the completion of our public hearing is I'm going to be looking for a motion from the council on a final number. So based on everything that we're learning and what we're hearing from the public and everything, I'll be looking for a motion on the 18th for a final number to go forth on the warrant article. Are there any questions? I'm just going to go back and forth with the mask here. Article 3, Expendable Maintenance Trust Fund. It has been presented to us that $90,000 will come out of the UFB, $90,000 will come out of the tax rate. Can someone please keep track of what we're pulling out of the UFB for me? So that's $90,000 being pulled out of the UFB. Does anyone have any questions or want to make any adjustments to Article 3? Budget Committee, jump in any time here if you want to. Yes?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm glad to see that we're proposing $90K to come out of the UFB to reduce the tax impact. But I still think that we need to mature the language in the article as written. I think it needs to be beefed up to strengthen the language to explain why this expense is so necessary.
So I'll work with our attorney and DRA, but we have to be careful when it comes to the wording of the article.
I understand.
The more we put in there, the more stringent it becomes. So if we were to say for winter maintenance and building foundations to protect that, if a roof goes, we can no longer use that money for it.
I'm thinking language such as it's important to this is to help maintain our facilities and so forth without tying our hands, but
Right.
to help explain to the taxpayers when they're in that voting booth what this is all about.
So I'll work with DRA and our attorney, but we have to be careful with electioneering and things of that nature, but I'll work to see if we can find a way to essentially better explain it through the warrant article for those that don't watch the meetings or don't read the paper or don't watch our channel.
Thank you.
Perhaps, as I may suggest, perhaps you want to name the buildings or the facilities that we're maintaining, or that we're maintaining town facilities such as police, fire, senior citizen, library, et cetera. Something along the lines that at least people look at and they go, oh, that's for all the buildings.
Yep.
Okay? That'd be great. All right, I've been asked to jump to Article 13. I guess there's some folks here this evening. I apologize, folks. So we're going to jump to Article 13, and Article 13 is to see if the town will authorize by majority vote to extend the water main in the area behind the Apple Tree Mall. Of course, I think we're gonna have more language here, right?
Correct, yes. This is a placeholder at the moment.
Do we have a number?
So I'd like to just provide some background to the council on this briefly. I know I did send you all an email with accompanying documents which are available to anyone in the public that would like to view them. Also, I'd just like to mention this evening here are members of the Lancaster neighborhood, which is behind the Apple Tree Mall. George Burnett, who is the owner of the Apple Tree Mall, and also on the line is Paul Rydell from the New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services. And again, just some very brief background. There had been some water testing, groundwater testing that had been done in the vicinity of the Apple Tree Mall that was unrelated to the PFOA issue back in 2017. As that monitoring was continued to be done through 18 and 2019, when they started testing for PFOAs in the summer of 2019 is when it was discovered that PFOAs had leached into the ground and had caused contamination of wells behind the Apple Tree Mall in the area of Lancaster Drive, and in particular affected at least eight known wells on Lancaster Drive. Following that, there began discussions between Cooperstown Environmental, who is the environmental consultant for the Apple Tree Mall, New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services, and the neighborhood who was affected by this, as to coming up with a mitigation of a solution to mitigate the contamination that happened. Very early in 2020, myself, Councilor Farrell, I believe Attorney Malaguti had met with, I think, all of the neighbors in the affected area at Town Hall to get a better understanding of what the situation was. That was back in the good old days when we were stuffed into the town council chambers. But we got a very good, I think, understanding of the seriousness of the situation after that. What then transpired was a lot of back and forth between Cooperstown and the Department of Environmental Services, to the point where finally in May, the Department of Environmental Services approved a water treatment installation and monitoring plan that was submitted by Cooperstown, whereby they would install water treatment systems in each of the homes as the solution for the contamination. This, without getting into, again, all of the details of that particular system, it was not received very well by the neighborhood for a variety of reasons, and those reasons were outlined in a letter that was sent to the Department of Environmental Services in June of 2020. A number of reasons were potential contamination of the aquifer by the discharge of the contaminated water, reduction in water pressure that was going to be a result of the water treatment systems, and then the lack of continued monitoring well into permanently into the future. What transpired after that letter and some back and forth between DES, the neighbors, myself, Cooperstown, is things had really reached the point where there was a stalemate, and that Cooperstown was asking to get into the affected residents' homes to start the process of looking at installing these treatment facilities. The neighbors were not accepting what DES had approved at that time and hadn't gotten answers to their concerns and questions, and DES was waiting for Cooperstown to proceed with the installation of the treatment systems. Through all of this, I should note that I think it is a desire and was a desire of all parties that if a municipal water supply could be the permanent solution, everyone would find that to be the most desirable, most preferable way to go with this. The issue there really, it comes down to cost, and that the water treatment systems are less than half the cost of what a municipal water system would have been. So it was at that time that I engaged Pennachuck Water into exploring the idea of, one, was it feasible to bring a municipal water supply to the neighborhood, and two, what was the cost going to be, and the possibility of a cost-sharing plan whereby the Apple Tree Mall owner, the town of Londonderry, and the residents would have a cost-sharing agreement to bring a municipal water supply to that particular area. Over the course of a few months in doing some on-site testing and some field work, Penachuk did get back with a pretty comprehensive breakdown of the costs, and ultimately what it resulted in is a cost of a little over $500,000. The cost they came back with was $515,000. And so what the parties have agreed to in concept is that if the voters were to approve a warrant article on the March ballot, that the town of Londonderry would fund half of the construction costs, only up to $250,000. The residents would pay for roughly half the cost of the hookup to their homes. And again, I would point out that under the water treatment systems, they would not have been paying anything toward that. But again, recognizing that the cost of the system municipal water supply is significantly more, they would agree to paying $2,000 per homeowner for that hookup. And then the owner of the Apple Tree Mall, George Vernette, would pay for the balance of the project. And so again, that's what's been agreed to pending approval of the warrant article in March, which could be funded either via taxation or fund balance. And I would just note as well that we have been engaging the Department of Environmental Services into other funding options available through the Groundwater Trust Fund, that if the warrant article were to, hopefully not, but if it were to fail, if it's put on the ballot, that perhaps there would be funding in another mechanism. So with that, again, I just went through a year and a half of discussions and negotiations in about 7 minutes. But I would invite either, Mr. Chairman, with your approval, either anyone from the neighborhood, or if I've missed anything, Ethan or George, or Paul Rydell, who's on from DES, if there's anything else to add that I missed in that.
But let me ask DES, please go ahead. The gentleman from DES, is there anything to add?
Yep, I'm here, yep.
Would you have anything to add to Mr. Smith's comments?
You know, I just, in quick preparation for tonight, I just pulled together a list of bullet items, you know, trying to hit the main highlights of the project, but, you know, I think those were just pretty adequately covered, and I think we would have been saying a lot of the same things. So if there's more details on any of those main steps that anyone has questions, I'm happy to try to answer, but I think that was really a very effective overview, and I'm not sure that following up on that, there's anything that jumps out at me that I need to embellish or you know, was missed.
Thank you. Sir, name and address, please.
Yes, Ethan Paul, 19 Lancaster Drive. So it's, as Kevin stated, it's been about a year and a half since we first got our letters stating that we could no longer drink our water. When we first found out, we said, how bad could it be? Then we found out that our numbers aren't 12, 14, 25 like we see in the rest of Londonderry. Ray's number is, what, 530? Yeah, my number is 430. Erica across the street? 260. So when we looked at this and we were approached with the filter option, we said this is not a long-term solution. These numbers aren't these lower ambient numbers like we're seeing. These things are through the roof. We're talking 30, 40, 50 times what the state limit has. That's when we came to Kevin and we said, what can we do? Obviously, thank you, Kevin, and thank you, George, for all the work that's been done, up and to this point. And we hope, as a neighborhood,
that we can, get this through. And unfortunately, as we all know, what the last year has brought with PFAS is, this is probably the tip of the iceberg.
Agreed.
And it's really shed a lot of light on everything.
I think you heard our opinion.
Yes, we did. Erica, would you like to say anything?
I'm Erica Lowy at 18 Lancaster Drive, and as Ethan said, I'm one of the people who has an exceptionally high PFAS load in the well water. To reiterate, just for those who don't remember exactly, we've been told, among other things, we are not allowed to brush our teeth with our well water. We're at that level of contamination. For us, part of the concern, additionally, with pursuing a point of entry system on the well water that didn't get mentioned in the quick highlights, which, Kevin, again, thank you for doing that. That was a very helpful summary of what's been going on. Part of our concern with that is that in the long term, that's an unsustainable approach, because from a realtor standpoint, it's not considered a permanent solution to the water issue. So when somebody is considering selling their home, as we do have some neighbors who have considered selling for one reason or another unrelated to the water issue, the feedback they get from realtors is this is an unsellable property until the water is permanently resolved. And that includes a house that has a point of entry system installed at this point, which is Ray's house. So what we're looking at is a situation where even if we had all agreed to point of entry systems, we would be locked into our homes whether or not we wanted to be for whatever reason until something longer term and municipal is installed. So I would like to add that out there as a point of consideration. And as someone with very young children who I'm hoping to raise in this house for a very long time, I would like to make sure that everyone in my neighborhood is able to enjoy that same comfort that I'm hoping to be able to achieve tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else? So just to reiterate what the town has said in the past, we're looking at, we've been given numbers by our engineering department of minimum of $100 million to put a water system in town. Their recommendation would be to add the sewer system at the same time. We'd be looking at $200 million to hook up the entire town. Plus, that would be the hookups to your individual homes as well. So just have an idea of the magnitude of what we've been trying to work our way through. I know some people say that, and I've said it, that we're underwhelmed by what DES is doing, but I think we have a bigger issue here. And to follow up, while the gentleman from DES is on the phone, I know it's a different gentleman, please put on our agenda for January 18th. What I'd like to do over the next 2 weeks is that we follow up with our town attorney and we start laying out an action plan and a timeline for DES of our expectations of what we expect to happen, and that we start working through that and laying that out for the council to discuss on the 18th and to move forward with them. Is that okay? Without objection? Okay. The Budget Committee had a question. Yes, Chad?
Yes, Mr. Chair, thank you. How many homes are affected by this?
8.
Thank you. And Mr. Smith, you said that the town would cover 250,000. That's the
50% up to 250,000.
Okay.
There's a chance, because this would go out to bid, and so we're hopeful that the $515,000 estimate is a conservative estimate. So there's a chance it could come in lower, in which case, if the final costs were lower, the town's cost would be lower. If it's over 500,000, the town would still be capped at 250.
And not a budget question, but are there, other than the 8, has anyone else in the vicinity been tested?
The other wells in that area have been tested, to my knowledge, Ethan, correct?
Okay. Yeah. And then maybe last question. Is there any benefit to putting it on out of the taxation or out of the fund balance? What are the benefits?
That will be discussed at the council level.
Thank you.
Yes, Tom?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Kevin, what, beyond the 80 homes that are impacted, what would a new water line serve beyond those 80 homes? Is there a potential there that it could serve
So-
greater community?
Yeah, so just so you're aware, it's 8 homes.
8, I think
Yeah.
you said 8. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, once the water line is established there, it could certainly be extended at some point to that rest of the neighborhood. You have Cortland over there, Baldwin is there, Devonshire, I believe. So there's a number of roads in that neighborhood where it could be extended to.
Okay, so, currently I have this sitting as a, warrant article number 13. It needs language still, and it would be $250,000, and that would go on the ballot to the voters. Any questions? Yes, I'm sorry, Joe, I didn't see you. Go ahead.
okay.
I should have known when you
Hello?
picked up the mic.
Okay, I just wanted to ask a question on the house, the filtration systems for the houses. How much was that, and I know that's not an option anymore, and I understand why, but how much was that per house?
My understanding, and George, maybe you're better able to answer this, but my understanding was to hook all 8 homes up to filtration systems, it was going to be somewhere in the area of $200,000.
So, and who was going to pay for that?
The owner of the Apple Tree Mall.
Oh, okay, and that's why they're pitching in again, okay. Because I was going to say, why couldn't we use those funds to go towards this other project, and I guess we are. Okay, good, thank you.
Yes,
What did the DPW consider for pipe sizing to possibly service future issues of future problems in that area, such as how many homes are in Century Village and how many, I mean, where does that stop and are we gonna put in a pipe that's gonna be big enough to service
Come on up, John.
enough area, John? I just can't think of just this one neighborhood. When we start to put this in,
Right, so Jim, that,
think of an expanded.
this line would extend from Workout Club, head cross-country through through an easement, then head up Lancaster. That would service Baldwin, Devonshire, Cortland, that neck of the woods.
Okay.
There's already a water line that's coming up through cross-country through Buttrick Village.
Okay.
That comes to Winding Pond, that heads north, or,
Okay.
that would head north
Okay.
for Century Village.
Okay, thank you.
So it's an 8-inch line.
Got it. Thank you.
yes,
Go ahead,
please.
Deb.
I just was wondering if the property owner doesn't have some sort of insurance that he can use to put a little bit more money into it and less money on the town, to kind of offset it. There has to be some. I want to help these people. I want to see them have drinking water. I just think that, I think we, the taxpayers, should have less of a burden, and the bigger burden should be on Pennachuck, who will be making money off of these people for a long time, and the landowner, developer, who is responsible. He bought the property, maybe knowing or not knowing, that I can't debate, but I think that there's where the bigger part of the responsibility should be, and the lesser part of the responsibility should fall onto the taxpayers. So I don't know if we look down the avenue of what the landowner has for insurance to maybe cover a little bit more of this.
Well, I would invite George to come up to the microphone, and George, if you maybe want to just state and clarify for the record what your understanding was when you purchased the property.
George Burnett, 70 Washington Street, Salem, Mass. When we purchased the property, we knew we had a perk, which is from a dry cleaner problem, not a large problem, but we basically straightened all that out. And then we had to, because we were on the DES, I guess, train, they wanted to test for PFAS, since the PFAS was, we knew nothing about the PFAS.
George, could I ask you just to stand a little bit closer to the mic? Thanks.
We knew nothing about the PFAS when we bought the property. Actually, we acquired a large environmental report by AEI out of Boston, 600-700 pages. There's no mention of PFAS. So this is like totally surprise for us. And as far as insurance, there is no insurance. Under current insurance policies, my insurance agent said they've eliminated all those exclusions years ago. There may be, 20, 30 years ago, there would have been something maybe different, but that's changed. And so I really can't comment on a lot. My lawyer doesn't want me to say a lot, so.
We can appreciate that.
But we'll work with the town.
Thank you. It's very
Okay,
much
thank you.
appreciated.
And as of today, it's vibrant, and there are new people in there, and you've done a nice job. Nice job.
So if I see without objection, I'm moving $250,000 on Article 13, and for that to go to the voters. We'll finalize all these after the public hearing on January 18th as far as funding is concerned.
John, I had one final question.
Oh, I'm sorry, Tom, I didn't see it.
It might be for Kevin, and that is there any implication in this extension of this line for fire hydrants? Or do we not know that yet? Includes fire hydrants, okay, thank you.
That we'll get to pay for.
Yeah.
At 40% more. Anyone else? I'm going to move. Yes, sir.
Aaron Ferreira, 15 Lancaster Drive. This is actually like my first town meeting ever, so I'm a little nervous. But so 6 months ago, I purchased my grandfather's property, 15 Lancaster Drive, which is directly behind the mall. It was a family purchase during COVID. It was very difficult considering the circumstances, but it was an FHA loan. My question is, with the FHA water testing, why, if the PFOS, that's correct, why were those not detected? The contaminants, so now we're in a pretty hard spot. This is actually my first home. I got a young girl, she's 8 years old. Again, we're depending on Monadnock bottled water, and sometimes we have to wait a little while to get it. My grandfather just moved out. He's at All American Care here in Londonderry. Army vet, just turned 88, bought the home 20 years ago, and they just found a lump on his kidney. Now, to say that this caused it is very questionable, but I'm saddened by this whole ordeal. I hope the town can hear me today and the people in my neighborhood, and I hope that this can be corrected and remediated efficiently, and I thank you for your time.
You're welcome. Okay, so I'm going to go back to Article 4, Roadway Maintenance Trust Fund. Article 4, Roadway Maintenance Trust Fund, I've got $650,000, and that's going to the ballot for the voters to approve. I'm going to take the next several capital reserve ones at the same time. Do I have any questions about Roadway Maintenance Trust? Capital Reserve Funding, GIS, Pillsbury Cemetery. Both of those are going to the ballot. Do I have any questions on 5 or 6? That's the capital reserve funding for the Geographic Information System, and that's the funding for the Pillsbury Cemetery expansion. Any questions? Capital reserve funding fire department equipment, 50% going from the undesignated fund balance, so that's another 50, and $50,000 to be raised by the taxpayers. That's Article 7. Do I have any questions? Any questions from the Budget Committee? I will finalize funding on the 18th. Department of Public Works leasing 3 vehicles. This is going to, the $55,000 is currently being raised by the taxpayers. Do we have any questions with regard to Article 8? All right, I'll be looking for motions on these to finalize the funding mechanism on January 18th after we hear from the public. I thought on Article 9 we were going to have a new number.
Well, so the council had some questions, and Colleen is here this evening to answer those questions. Ultimately, the number is what the council decides they want it to be, but I wanted to give Colleen an opportunity to speak with you all.
So Colleen, I think what we're looking for is some sort of hybrid number here in which we're working off of our old plan towards, making more of a adjustment versus an entirely new plan. And we'd be looking for some sort of number from you on that so that we can capitalize on the work that's been done over the last 20 years.
Yeah, I think that, and the initial number that we had put together was assuming $150,000, like you said, for a brand new from scratch master plan. We have a lot of good data existing, but needing to update that. It's hard to quantify and tell you what it could cost to do if we wanted to just do absolute bare bones. The minimum of what's required for a master plan is a visioning statement and a land use analysis. Doing that type of, it depends on if our GIS warrant article passes. If that passes and we have our good GIS aerial mapping data, then we can do that update for less money than what it would be if we needed to do additional data collection to establish that land use map and establish current changes. So it really depends on what direction the council wants to go in. We could do a plan for as cheap as $30,000 to $50,000. That's a very bare bones minimum and meets the letter of what are those necessary provisions in a master plan. I think that doing that type of approach, it doesn't necessarily reflect the change that's happened in the town over the past 10 years since the 2012 plan was adopted. So I wouldn't necessarily recommend that budgeting something for a $30,000 bare bones minimum master plan is necessarily the best approach for future planning for the town of Londonderry. I think we want to continue to build on what's been done in the past, but I understand the council's concerns on budget and limitation. I would say that this year, I would recommend putting some funds towards a master plan, knowing that the intent of this capital reserve is to begin that process in 2022, 2023. So if the town does, if the council would put some funding towards a project, and then we can work over the next year on working with the planning board and the council to develop a full scope of work of what that should look like, and then we can ask the voters for any additional funds that may be needed next year as well.
So I'm probably going to say something that a planner doesn't want to hear, but having been involved for the last 22 years and 11 years on the planning board, the die is sort of cast at this point of the direction that we're going in, and that the number of things that have happened since 2012, many were known in 2008 and 09. And only because of history I know that. I think that's what our concern is that we're looking at the amount of buildable land left in town, and the rate of the current real estate market is really driving where we're going as a community. And with the change to the 55 and older, we'll probably continue in that direction. So I think that's where the council is struggling with a new master plan. I mean, am I hitting the mark here? Anyone from the council, questions? So I think that, go ahead, Joe.
Anything, it's terrible.
Go ahead, Joe. You go ahead, and then we'll have Deb go.
Okay, yeah, so I just want to clarify, so you're looking at this really in two phases, right? A 75 this year and a 75 next year?
Correct.
Okay, so just want to keep that in mind as we're talking about this, because, and I also know that you said not a complete rewrite?
No, that would be, so $150,000 would be a new master plan.
Okay.
And that's comparable to what other local communities have done in the past year and a half.
Okay, so just throwing a number out there. So say if we did 35 this year and 35 next year, to get kind of I'm just throwing a number out, to get kind of an update. That's probably something that's more along the lines of what we're all talking about up here.
I think for a total of about $70,000, we could do a good update of the plan and keeping the same vision and principles. We might scale back then on some of the more expensive, the last go-around did the Planapalooza kind of trademarked. We'd need to scale back on those type of events, but we can find other ways of doing outreach for the type of numbers you're talking, Joe.
Okay, thank you.
I think Deb had something.
Do you have a question?
I can barely hear anybody. I couldn't hear what John was saying, and I kind of heard her numbers, but not really.
So,
And I'm sorry.
so I'll repeat what I said. What I said, Deb, is I said that since 2008 and 2009, most things have been known going into the last master plan, and that we would be, so the die is sort of cast on where the community is going, especially with the change in the 55 and older ordinance that we updated at the last meeting. So that I believe that most of the members of the council are looking for something that more builds on the direction we're going in versus a new master plan.
And Deb, I did not give specific numbers, but Joe has just mentioned if it was something between $35,000 this year or next year, $70,000 I think could produce a good quality update to the plan. Anything less than that, if I was throwing around numbers of 30 to 50,000, would be a real, skin and bones, just, bare minimum to pass muster.
I personally, as one counselor, think that master plans should be living, breathing documents, and I think waiting to change them all the time and spending a huge amount of money isn't the way to go. We need to be able to move quickly and adjust and constantly look at it and let the markets delegate what's the best aspect and what's the best way to go for our town. That being said, I guess I would be for the smaller amount of monies and then budgeting out for bigger projects on it. And I think that's what I heard, but I'm not sure.
It's close. Okay, so I think what we're looking at is that we'll talk about the 35K versus the 75K, and look to build something that is more of a document that becomes more of a what's the best way to put this? More of an update and something that's annually updated by the planning board.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so let's make that adjustment. That's $35,000. We'll have to make a decision on funding, and right now it's going to the taxpayers. $5,000 for recreation out of the UFB. We've had multiple conversations about this. Is there anything further anyone would like to discuss on Article number 10? Article number 11 is the cable reserve funding for cable, capital reserve funding for cable equipment, and this is coming out of the capital funding that comes from the user fees for $32,500. Is there any questions? Okay. All right, the next one is the purchase of the Max Apple land adjacent to the town hall. I believe Mr. Malaguti is here to walk us through this one, right?
He is.
So this is Article 12. Article 12, we don't have the full language for this yet, but I'll ask Mr. Malaguti, who has been working with the Conservation Commission on negotiating a purchase and sale agreement regarding this property.
Good evening. My name is Mike Malaguti. I'm the Assistant Town Solicitor, and as the Chairman said, I was asked to introduce the terms of the town's proposed purchase of a 28-acre parcel at 114 Pillsbury Road in Londonderry. This is the orchard which abuts the Town Hall complex to the northeast of the intersection of Mammoth Road and Pillsbury Road. About 2 years ago, the town became aware that Moose Hill Orchards was interested in selling that particular piece of property. In late 2019 and early 2020, the Conservation Commission and Town Council were apprised of the terms that Moose Hill Orchards was looking for at that point. Both bodies, in consultation with their attorneys, directed the town's attorneys to explore the matter further. There ensued on-again, off-again discussions with Moose Hill Orchards and its representatives, culminating around December 1st of last year when we reached the point where we felt that we had come to terms with Moose Hill Orchards. They were satisfied, and the terms that we negotiated were substantially similar to what the Town Council and the Conservation Commission had indicated they would find acceptable almost 2 years ago. Now, there are two separate purchase and sales agreements and two separate funding sources. The agreements call for the property to be subdivided into a 5-acre lot adjacent to Mammoth Road and a larger lot comprising the balance of the property to the rear. Under the first agreement, the conservation part of the transaction, the CONSCOM is proposing to purchase the back lot to be funded from their conservation land fund and several $100,000 in drinking and groundwater grant funds that have recently been awarded. The conservation piece is contingent on three separate things: approval by the Conservation Commission at a public hearing, approval of the town council at a public hearing, and completion of the subdivision process. Under the second transaction, the town's part of the transaction, the town proposes to purchase the front 5 acres for municipal purposes. That agreement is also contingent on three separate things: approval by the town council at a public hearing, approval of the voters at the 2021 town meeting, and completion of the subdivision process. This is a summary of the two transactions. My expectation is that the council will discuss and debate the merits of the transaction at the January 18th meeting. The purchase and sales agreement and warrant article language will be published well in advance of that meeting. The Conservation Commission has noticed a public hearing on their part of the transaction to occur at their January 12th meeting. The purpose of today's presentation, brief presentation, is to give as much notice and transparency as possible in advance of those two public hearings. I'm happy to take any of the council's questions.
Are there any questions? So it's my understanding the Conservation Commission is looking at a purchase and sale agreement in the amount of $1.1 million?
That's correct.
And that the council piece would be $250,000 that would need to go to the voters for approval?
Also correct.
Any further questions with regards to the Mack property? We will take this into more detail with the warrant article and with the details of the warrant article on January 18th. Is there anything further tonight for Mr. Malaguti, who has been involved in this process? Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
So we're going to have to look at the funding mechanism for this article on the 13th, whether that be the UFB or whether it's going to go directly to the voters, and we'll need to have feedback from the public hearing and a discussion amongst the council. Article 14, to reestablish the Londonderry Housing Authority as an economic development revolving loan fund. I'm not familiar with this one.
So, Mr. Chair, I just had a meeting before this meeting tonight with the Londonderry Housing Redevelopment Authority. Essentially what this is going to do, and Attorney Ramsell is working on the warrant article language right now. There's no budgetary impact to this, but essentially what it does is it broadens the geographic scope of the housing authority to be able to use their current funding for economic development purposes beyond just the area of the airport. When this committee was established back in the 1960s, it was originally done, the intent in mind was to spur economic development in the area around the airport. That's been done. And so they still have a significant amount of funding remaining, but it can only be used in that area. And so this would open it up to the rest of the town to continue to spur economic development, but do it townwide rather than just the airport area.
I look forward to the language.
Okay.
Any questions? Okay, so, yes, go ahead.
Point of order, you just asked somebody to keep track of the USB that we've talked about.
Please.
UFB, so it was at 220K, but if you reduce the master plan to 35, that's a savings of about 40,000, so now we're at 180K.
Thank you for that, I appreciate that. Okay, so earlier in the meeting, gentlemen came here and discussed a charter commission. If we were to do anything like that, this would be the time and the place for it. This is not the complete time and the place for it, but it would occur as part of the warrant articles. I believe what the gentleman was discussing is a charter commission to, and the form of government, I believe he was discussing was a city form of government. That would put the town and the school under one form of government. May or may not be with or without a mayor. I'm not entirely sure about that. What I would probably suggest is that if the council is interested, we put this on as part of public comment on the 18th, entertain comment about the Charter Commission and whether the citizens of Londonderry are interested in a charter commission, and ask the school department if they want to attend and give us their opinion, because if they don't really want to move down this path, there's not a whole lot of sense in doing that. But I'm looking for whatever the council would like to do. Yes?
Go ahead, Deb.
All right, well, on the Charter Commission, I'd like to maybe look at, like, doing something that Derry's doing right now with their joint meetings with their state reps. It's actually working really well, and it looks like a good endeavor. But I wanted to ask about the housing airport in regards to, if somebody could just give me the status of what's going on with the TIFs up there.
Sure. The TIF districts that were established have both been dissolved at this point, as the reimbursement, the paybacks to the developers were done a few years ago.
So there's no more TIFs at all, right?
That is correct.
Okay. Thank you. I'm sorry. And it's so hard to communicate. I apologize.
It's quite all right. All right, so do you all want to take it up as something during public comment and see what kind of feedback we get from the community?
Yes, I do.
So I guess if Tony went home and he's now watching, he can be yelling at the TV that we actually listened. Okay, that's all I've got for budget tonight. Is there anything from anybody on budget?
Mr. Chair, one other comment. If anyone is considering a citizen's petition, it needs to be, the last date to turn it in is next Tuesday, the 12th, though I would highly recommend it being turned in prior to then, so that if there are any issues with it, we can let the person know. But again, next Tuesday, the 12th, is the last day for citizen's petition, and again, you need 25 signatures of registered voters in town. And we always recommend you get more than 25, just in case someone you thought was registered or someone who thinks they're registered isn't registered.
Okay, so I'll move through the end here very quickly.
Can I just chime in with that?
Yes?
As always, we recommend you bring it to us so we can have our attorney look at it to ensure that it's legal. If he makes a change after you get 25 signatures, then you need to obtain 25 signatures again, because the article has since changed.
Okay. All right, so just a couple of quick things here. Our budget hearing is on January 18th, even though I've said that a dozen times. And when is our deliberative session?
February 6th, Saturday.
Saturday, February 6th is our deliberative session here we're doing it in the gymnasium, right?
Correct.
That'll be in the gymnasium for social distancing. Move quickly through here. Approval of minutes of December 21st, 2020. May I have a motion?
So moved, Mr. Chairman.
Roll call vote.
Aye, Joe Green.
Hi, Jim Butler.
Aye, Tom Dolan.
Aye, John Farrell. Minutes are approved. Liaison reports. Anything new? Town manager report. Anything additional?
I'm all set. Thank you.
Assistant town manager. Anything new?
I just want to mention one thing, Mr. Chair. The date of our next meeting, as you said, is January 18th. That also happens to be Martin Luther King Jr. Day. Town Hall will be open that day. However, I caution you that the state offices are closed that day. So if anyone comes in to register their car in the clerk's office and it requires a call up to the state offices, we may not be able to get you an answer, and your transaction will be delayed to the next day. So we like to put that out there in advance. You may just want to come on Tuesday instead of Monday to Town Hall. We'll also be putting this out on social media.
Okay. Thank you for that. We have, so just to reiterate from this evening, okay, several things. One is we want our attorney to engage with the town staff and prepare the council for a discussion about PFOAs and DES and our response and timeline. Also run the Charter Commission piece by our attorney to make sure that, we know what we're getting into when we get into this discussion. Have I missed anything else this evening? Is there, since we actually do have some folks here, is there any further comment before I ask for an adjournment? Motion to adjourn? I need a motion, second.
One question, John.
Yes.
For the deliberative and the next public meeting, since there's been such a spike in COVID, are we going to allow people to call in or Zoom in onto those meetings if they want to have public input so that they can participate if they feel uncomfortable attending?
Ms. Dravick has been running that whole piece of it for us, so I'll let her answer.
Councilor Paul, thank you for the question. We have tried every which way to Sunday to come up with a mechanism to actually allow that to work, essentially to run a meeting within a meeting. We've worked with our IT folks and our cable folks. There does not seem to be a mechanism to be able to do that such that it would come through clearly on the television feed in terms of the feedback and that sort of thing. So right now, we're not required to do that under the governor's order. If we're holding an in-person meeting, the options are either all in-person, all remote, or for the speakers, as we've done tonight, sort of the low-tech version of holding up the cell phone. If anyone has any ideas for how we can make it work, we're happy to listen, but we've tried already and we have not been able to figure out a good mechanism for doing so.
All right, thank you.
All right, so I have a motion to adjourn on the table, roll call vote.
Hi, Joe Green.
Aye, Tom Dolan.
Hi, Deb Paul.
Hi, John Farrell. We're adjourned this evening. Thank you very much for attending. Good night.